slice. And I have what? Oh, and sex. We're gonna use the S word in this. It's okay. We've all been there. It's okay. And I was gonna wow you with my 29 published works, but whatever, Jeffe.
Okay, I think I'll start off with what is your definition of fantasy? There's not a set one, but what do you
You want us to go in order or jump out?
jump out is okay?
Because
I think Jeffe should answer this. She's actually the only one who actually writes romantasy. What they're calling romantasy today.
actually, well, it's interesting because romantasy is a fairly new term. It's a portmanteau that is kind of cool because it's originated in the reader space. I first started hearing it a couple of years ago at ApollyCon, which is a big reader conference based on Jennifer L. Armentrout's works. And I think what we're looking at now is that romantasy is ending up being the huge umbrella term that we then have other genres under, so that we would put fantasy romance or science fiction romance or urban fantasy under the romantasy umbrella. And my personal theory, which is based on absolutely zero research whatsoever, is that the readers in part originated this term as a pushback against YA fantasy, because there is this thing where any books that have kissing, that have romance, that are written by women or centered on female characters get shoved into YA, and everybody's really tired of that.
I think, isn't Sarah J. Maas would be a good example?
Sarah J. Maas, because she's been called YA fantasy for a long time, and her books are very clearly not YA. I mean, like the first couple maybe, but then after that, no.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Big maybe.
Anyone else have something they want to add?
I like that though, but I didn't. So I kind of write romance.
Yeah, I think
kind of fit under that.
it's you're under the umbrella. You made the under our
I
umbrella.
also like, thank you. Being under your umbrella.
I also kind of see it as delayed recognition, because obviously like people like Jeffe and other people have been writing these kinds of things for a very long time, but it hasn't gotten this kind of industrial kind of upsweep that we're seeing right now in terms of like the TikTok and all the promo and all like the agents are hungry for these kinds of stories.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is kind of like this kind of watershed moment where like, all the tides raise all boats kind of thing. And that's really exciting to see because it's really well overdue.
And one of the situations in traditional publishing is that one of the major publishers has just created a romance imprint, a new romance imprint, which focuses a lot on fantasy, does it not?
Yeah, well, and it's under Tor. So
Right.
Tor, which has always been the kind of bastion of science fiction and fantasy, Devi Pillai, who is now publisher at Tor, created this imprint called Bramble that is romance focused. And yeah, exactly.
And this is brand new, and so editors are hungry for it there.
Yep.
I'm just curious, are there any writers who are interested in writing romantasy type things? There we go. Yes, I know you too. Very interesting. I was just curious.
So, in your opinion, do you think there's a difference between romantic fantasy and romantasy, or is it just all one thing by different names?
I would put romantic fantasy under romantasy. I mean, probably who we should talk to here at this point is the outlier, because you would not say that you write romantasy, right?
No, I don't. I definitely don't.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. And I only say that emphatically because I know what my genre, where my thrusts are, and they're not in the,
So to speak.
Yeah.
they're not in the sexy place. But I would say, would you call? Okay, so just at the dinner we had the Miss of Avalon up on the
Right.
On the slideshow. So would we have called that, if that were published today, would we call that romantasy?
I'm gonna say yes.
Yeah.
What does the audience say? I don't know. You've been nodding, and now you're giving us. I
What
don't know,
about
face.
Patricia McKillop's work?
I mean, sometimes some books, yes.
Yeah,
I mean,
very much.
I think Forgotten Beasts of Eld falls under that category, but
So it's always been around.
right.
Um,
I mean, yeah, it depends, you know, like we were talking about Lois McMaster Bujold, the Vorkosigan saga, if we're looking at science fiction, like, and Lauren could speak to that, but you know, it's some books, yes,
Elizabeth
And a
Scarborough
lot, no.
wrote
yeah,
romantic themed fantasy back in the 80s.
Anne McCaffrey
Anne McCaffrey.
back in the 60s.
All right, so why now? Sorry. I
That's
just like
okay. That's a great question.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm talking a lot.
No, but you have your right. That's what I was gonna say. Like all of a sudden, it's the big thing, and like, but what I mean, things come in waves, obviously. So this is the next big wave.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it is that there are kind of the writers of my generation, of my age, who grew up reading Anne McCaffrey and Patricia McKillip and Vonda McIntyre and Tanith Lee and all of these really great
all right, Silver
Yeah.
Medal Lover.
Silver Medal Lover is a great example. And so like now that we're writing, you know, like we grew up looking for all of the books that were possible with like women who were not baking bread while the guys went off and did interesting things, right? You know, so it's like now that we get to write the books, this is what we want to write. And it turns out, shockingly enough, that there's a huge audience for it.
Great.
Let's see. So switch gears a little bit. So what do you see as the role of romance in science fiction?
Well, I think if you're going to write a well-rounded world, romance has to be involved. And so that's how I've always approached it. I find, you know, science fiction though it's often touted as this kind of literature of ideas, and that is great. And that is, you know, something that's very important to kind of look at. But I feel like sometimes we put that on such a high pedestal that we forget the human parts of things. And you can't have a human story without, you know, matters of the heart, I feel like in some ways, because ultimately romance is about connection in some way, right? And it can be a romantic connection. We can talk about platonic connections and things like that, but ultimately it's just a variation on those kinds of themes. And so I feel like, you know, if you don't at least touch on it, I feel like you're not writing a very realistic story. And that's something that science fiction writers tend to really like hang their hat on, is like, this is realistic, this is very probable because we can trace these, you know, trajectories into the future, but they sometimes forget that human piece. And I feel like that's why I personally always don't want to forget that when I'm writing.
Right, it's unrealistic to ignore it.
Yep.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I was on a panel once and somebody brought up the romance, and this one writer, and I wouldn't say it anyway, but I can't remember his name. It's between two writers. I just can't remember which one it was.
You could just slam both of them.
I'll just blame them both. And he said, I'd cut my throat before I ever put romance in my books. I'm like, well, honey, you got here because of romance. Just saying, you know, and you are married. I mean, okay. It's so odd, the reactions that you get.
Yeah, that you're lowering yourself. And I think that a lot of, you know, now that female writers are, you know, gaining ascendance or, you know, have not been prejudiced against as much as in the past. We were just walking over to see the Jack Williamson collection and walking with Martha Wells and a younger writer, aspiring writer, and she was asking us if we thought she should have to take a male pseudonym to write fantasy and science fiction, that she knew that had been done in the past. And we said, you know, not anymore. It's really, yes, it used to be you had to do that because people wouldn't publish or booksellers wouldn't buy books by women as much.
Or editors would prejudge
Would prejudge
by the
it.
name, which actually has only flipped really recently.
I think so too.
Yeah, my
Which
my
goes
wife,
to the why now.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm sorry, your wife, Alex?
yeah, my wife, A.M. Delmonica is the name that they publish under, and that was specifically chosen to come across as non-binary, right? To avoid being prejudged by their byline.
But now we have this, the readership has changed a lot, that, most readers are female or female presenting now. There's a huge audience of female readers who are looking for female stories, female authors, queer stories. It's no longer they only want to read Heinlein or Tolkien.
Yeah, and I remember even when I read Jack Williamson's Terraforming Earth, it's such a fascinating story. And it's like, so every new clone group of kids that come out every few hundred years or 1,000 years, I can't remember. It would be funny because they'd have like the same base personalities and everything, but like this one might hook up with that one, like it not hook up, but like the relationships, like. And I was always like, okay, now in this one, who's gonna get with who, like who's gonna like who, and who's gonna have the little romance going on, and even in something like that, but that's real. I mean, these kids grow up together and they're all clones, but they're having to see to the new world and check it out and see how weird it is.
Yes, they have to. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just thinking of Ray Naylor's book, The Mountain in the Sea, which was published in the last couple of years and made a big, huge, monstrous splash. And there is a pseudo romance in there where one of the main characters is has a relationship with someone who we believe to be human at first, but turns out that they're just like an AI. They're a comfort AI, someone for them to pretend to have a relationship with, to give them those dopamine feels, but completely there's nobody on the other end, and that's very sad.
I think going back to your original question about the romance in there and why include it too, for me, romance and sexual intimacy are often part of the character transformation. That's a huge part for me, that and that's me coming from the romance side, but having someone who is trying to handle the quest part of the story or the problem part of the story, the external conflict, deal with the war or deal with the magic. But as part of that, they have to learn how to connect with another human being, to be able to demask, to be able to open themselves up enough to accept and find true love. That's like a huge part of the human experience.
That can be scarier than death.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, being vulnerable
Vulnerable,
to somebody else. Yeah.
Do you think that the role of romance in science fiction is different than in other genres, or the same, or?
I mean, I think it's going to vary by author and story, right?
Sure.
Depends on the story you're telling them.
I think there's more you can do to a certain extent in science fiction because you can layer in, our human kind of, our social, cultural things that we're dealing with now and kind of project them into the future. But I think with fantasy, you're kind of going in the opposite direction. And so I think playing with that kind of space is what is appealing if you're more future forward, or if you're more revisionist history, I guess, because when we write the history, sometimes we're trying to write the history we wished we had seen, kind of thing. So I think that's kind of part of the appeal. I didn't answer your question.
No, but Kelly, what do you think? Because I know you don't really do romance per se, but you do have that, like the sexual intimacy, the questions in science fiction.
I just wrote down the names of the stories that I have where people actually do get it on, because otherwise I'm not going to remember, right? But I do have a science fiction story called We Who Live in the Heart, where people are basically, they've colonized space whales and they're up in an upper atmosphere and they're trying to live their lives inside these space whales. And the main character, who is a very closed off human, falls in love with the new person in their world. And that's not the main point of the story, the main point of the story is kind of set slightly to a side and of that, and it also involves the person that they fall in love with. But yeah, I mean, watching somebody drop their mask, like you say, and like you say, is
Yeah, I think, like one thing we talk about with science fiction in particular, and we could maybe talk about fantasy separately, but that science fiction is also asking the question of what does humanity look like with this technology, right? Or out in space, confronted with something truly alien.
embodiment. Yeah,
Yes.
questions of embodiment.
Yeah. And so that unmasking that being at your most essential human self is part of that, right? You know, it's like the naked human in space. How do you grapple against something so immense, so cold, so
Yeah.
inhuman, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of the theme of the lectureship this time, right? The inhuman. Whereas love and romance is one of our most essentially
things.
human things. Yeah, like our
Illogical.
sexuality and our connections to other people,
Deeply emotional,
right?
cannot be explained, does not respond to logic.
Right.
There's an interesting movie on, I think it's on Netflix, it might be Hulu. It has Michael Pena, and it's called Extinction. And if you don't want to hear spoilers, the whole movie is about, he starts having these dreams about some kind of attack on him and his family and the people around them, the neighbors and everyone. So he's having these dreams and he doesn't know what's happening, and then the attack actually starts. And so his whole focus is saving his family, his wife and his 2 daughters, and getting them out of there, and then helping other people. And there's a lot of emotion, that plays throughout, and when I was watching, I was thinking, wow, I would feel the same way about some of that stuff. And then at the end of the movie, you find out that he and his wife and daughters and everybody there, they're all androids, but they don't know it. They're all androids, and the dreams that he was having were memories of when they attacked the planet and they killed a lot of the humans. The humans had to actually evacuate, and then they reset their memories and such. And so now it's the humans trying to come back and take the Earth back from them. And that was a really interesting twist, because I didn't pick up on that
That's cool.
android component until basically right where it came in.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's interesting because in some ways that touches back to Martha's keynote speech where she was talking about, the idea of that if we create something sentient, that they would automatically be enslaved by us, right? And that you don't blame them for rebelling. So, I think that is one of our questions is like, when we get real AI and not language learning models, will they be capable of emotion? Will they be capable of love? Is that something that automatically comes along with sentience?
Tanith Lee thought so.
Tanith Lee thought so. Yeah, where if you all haven't read The Silver Medal Lover, that's an amazing story about a human and an android or robot falling in love. And that is, we'll just say everything here is a spoiler, right? If you haven't read it, we're going to spoil it. But to his surprise, he begins to feel love for her in the end. And this also, God, I'm talking a lot, I'm really sorry. But it also connects to a question that was asked during Martha's reading about how Art and Murderbot, that Art likes to be there while Murderbot watches the shows because Art doesn't have the ability to feel emotion in the same way as Murderbot does because of that organic interface. So Art can feel the emotions. Yeah.
We're a species that makes pet rocks, right? And so we can fall in love with just about anything with enough encouragement. So, I think that's also something that is fun to play with, because you can put, humanity in all these different contexts with all these different, alien or other kind of spaces, and humanity still finds a way to humanize and empathize and, maybe some other things too. So I think that's exploring that is also part of, you know, some of the mandate, I think.
Right, because we're attracted to things that aren't like us.
Mm-hmm.
Often. We're attracted to the alien.
That's right.
Or
Or at least the tentacles, you know.
well, yeah,
Tentacles are good, yeah.
you know, like we know we're not supposed to anthropomorphize. We've been told, you know, don't do that, and we do it anyway. But I was telling Kelly, you know, like my husband turned in his old iPhone and traded it for a new one, and we were driving away, and his iPad started doing the message, "You have left your iPhone behind," and he kept getting the message, and we felt really bad. We're sorry.
My mate.
And finally it stopped, and we're like, oh, it's dead now.
It's heartbreaking.
Remember the rover? Mars
Yeah, my
rover?
battery's low, it's
Oh.
getting dark.
That was for so many people.
Yes. No, but it's a thing. Why do we
The
feel
last
bad about the
statement
Mars?
is, I am cold, my battery's dying, I'm cold, or whatever, and I read that. and
It's
that
cold
made me
now.
wanna cry.
Right. Yeah.
Or it's getting cold or something like that, yeah.
But that's a great point, because this is what we're talking about, you know, like, why do we have these emotions in with science fiction? Because that's where we're at.
Absolutely.
Don't you love it? Like, don't you want to rescue it?
That one rescue it too.
I really do. There are other aspects to sexuality and sexual content. One that I've explored a couple of times is economic benefit. There is absolutely no reason to not write stories about sex workers in the past and in the future. They are everywhere, and they always will be. It's the world's oldest profession, right? Older than motherhood, as they say, as the
But
old
by
joke-
9 months, yeah.
well, as the old joke says. And also, like, we have sex for other reasons, right? We have sex for status. We have sex to relieve boredom. We have sex out of despair or out of grief or out of, you know, desperation for
Stress
connection,
relief.
stress relief. There's, you know, there's, you know, 7 billion reasons to have sex. And leaving them out of our fiction is, as you said, really unrealistic. I have a series of stories that are about burlesque dancers who are in a way sex workers, who are sex workers, and using the kind of like the vehicle of burlesque dancing as an engine for freedom and liberation and pushing away shame and power and accepting of one's body and accepting of one's sexual self. It's another way to do it. Another way to explore sexuality in fiction.
Yeah, I really like exploring the power part of it, like who really has the power and that sort of thing. And even like if you have this meek heroine or whatever, and then she realizes the power that she has with you know, however, and she decides how to use that power. I always find that interesting. That's an interesting theme.
Yeah.
This is breaking out of a trap, I guess, right?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about, like, your books too touch on a thing that we haven't really talked about is, you know, like sex and intimacy as comfort. Very often for you, that's the place of refuge for your heroines, is to come back and, you know, that sense of, you know, like we talk a lot about that we don't want to have heroines rescued anymore because we want them to be empowered, but there's something very powerful about being rescued, right? You know, that's like we all long on some level to be rescued from our problems, to be taken care of, you know, and protected and cherished, and that's part of it.
And there's nothing wrong with that. It's
Right.
weird because it's like you've got that pendulum, and now all of a sudden, oh no, she can never be rescued. And I'm like, really? 'Cause I like it when my heroine is rescued. So I disagree with that one, but
Yeah.
but my heroines are still always, very strong.
Very
Very-
active.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just like me. I'm
Yeah.
so active. Oh, I have special powers.
And you are cherished.
Yeah, yeah. This is true.
But I think that's a powerful thing, that feeling of being cared for.
Right.
We've been talking about that. And how that's kind of the end of the stress cycle, right? Yeah.
Is it the traditional old-fashioned golden age science fiction hero who is an island,
Right,
who doesn't need anyone?
right.
There's some wish fulfillment there.
He's an island, he needs no one, but he can't find his car keys, right? He still has to be- Sorry, guys. It's a bad time.
I just read Theodore Sturgeon, one of his autobiographies, which is, it's called Argyle, and it is about his stepfather, and it is about the abuse that his stepfather put him through. And it was interesting because in this this short, it's just a short book, it's maybe 150 pages, Theodore Sturgeon comes out as being bisexual. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah,
And why did I bring this up?
I was wondering.
I guess I brought it up because in this, Theodore Sturgeon is one of these golden age
Right.
science fiction writer guys, a great one, a truly great one. And he came out of that shell to be vulnerable and admit to the pain that was done to him, and what comfort he could take in intimacy with other boys, to help heal himself during the times when he was vulnerable to his stepfather. So that's brave.
Yeah.
And this kind of makes me think again of both of those things together, of the why now, that, like when we look at those old science fiction and fantasy stories where, like the hero is an island and he's powerful and he gets all of the women and all of this kind of thing. And we laugh about it. We'll say, well, it's like an adolescent male fantasy, right? Like you go out and do all this kind of thing. And a lot of the female-driven science fiction and fantasy is very much like the female fantasy. Like, why can't you have several men? And why can't you be able to shapeshift? And why can't you be a sorceress and do all of these things? And, like maybe part of the why now is we're in I don't even understand what wave of feminism we're in now, but it's like we're getting this massive pushback where we have politicians openly saying that they think women shouldn't be able to vote, and so, but there are so many of us like where we do control all of our finances, and like I support my household with my writing, and we're in these more powerful positions, and it's like, well, we want our adolescent female fantasies. We want to write our books about being able to go out and have the hot guy or several hot guys. Like they got the Princess of Mars, and so now we want ours, right?
Absolutely.
All right, I think I'm going to turn it over to audience question, and at this point, anyone have any question to ask our panelists?
Oh,
So I'm a very avid romantasy reader, and I'm curious where you get your inspiration for steamy scenes that are so different from one might experience, such as like nodding. Like, how do you get the inspiration to write those steamy scenes when you may have not experienced them?
And she's looking at me. Reading.
Reading.
Reading. I mean, Okay, so a few things. Yes, reading, imagination. I mean, sexual fantasies are potent to, and there's the whole, what is it, Rule 31 of the internet? Like
34.
if 34, thank you. Like if there's a kink out there, someone has made a website for it. You know, that kind of like, wouldn't it be cool if, wouldn't it be fun? Would that feel good? Would that be interesting? But also taking from other examples in our ecosystem, like nodding comes from dogs and wolves, right? So it's like, oh, well, if this is like what a wolf is like, and you have a werewolf, would he maybe have these characteristics? And what would that be like if you carried it over to human shape? So again, it's like back to the fantasy, right? It's like, well, wouldn't it be cool if? It would be a fun ride.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, part of writing is it's a safe space to kind of explore some of these ideas
Yes.
and things. And that exploration can be, valuable to the reader, but it can also be valuable to the writer. And I think, we've been talking around it, but like, because of, the backlash we're seeing, but this is a literature that, kind of destigmatizes shame in a lot of ways and celebrates pleasure and consensual, relations. And so that's dangerous to a lot of people. And so,
so dangerous.
and, that's a part of the reason we're getting the backlash, but it's also because it's such a safe space to explore these issues. And people don't know what you're reading, and that's scary.
That's an interesting point too, because the advent of Kindle changed a whole lot of this, where the people not knowing what you're reading, that you did not have to have the clinch cover or something where people would go, oh, are you reading one of those trashy romances? It's like, no, you have your nice little blank Kindle. You could be reading Nodding. Nobody needs to know, right?
Inuyasha fanfic.
What's that about fanfic?
Inuyasha fanfic. There's lots of nodding in that one.
Anything else?
Good question. So obviously, like, you guys all write species in your book. When do you decide where to place those? Like, in what point in your character development do you think it's relevant to add that scene in?
Sometimes you start with those scenes.
Yeah, my story Waters of Versailles starts with fucking.
But explain why.
Because the main character, Sylvain, who is a man's man, man about town, man's man, ladies man, man about town, in the court of Versailles in 1738, needs to perform sexually with a high status woman to be able to climb the social ladder himself. It's part of, it's expected. Being a lover and being a ladies man is expected of him. He is fucking, and he is having anxiety about performing, and there are some distractions in his way, and it's causing a problem for him.
And so for me, because what I write, it's so much a part of the character transformation that usually those scenes of like full intimacy, it'll be like a gradual thing, like a little bit more and a little bit more, and then the full intimacy comes at a climactic point, forgive me, in the novel, where it's the person really breaks open or needs to be broken open, because again, it's that demasking, it's that cracking open of the emotional armor, and where the person has to confront themselves. They have to confront that soft underbelly in order to be able to grow enough to do the thing that they have to do in order to triumph.
And that's a lot of that for me too. And also just, I still feel that my characters get a real sense of self-empowerment, and from it, when they allow this person into their lives and
Yeah.
they make that decision, it's their decision, and so that's a big part of it
A
too.
lot of times for you, they're embracing the wrong person too.
True.
And they're kind of doing the big F you to everybody else because they're like, no, this is the person I want.
Right.
And I don't care what society thinks.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very true. Very true.
Do you start out with sex scene often? Is that one of your
Well, it's more just when I'm conceiving my story and I know that there's going to be a love interest or a partnership, usually is what it ends up being, that I know where those scenes are going to go and I have to figure out the rest of it too. So sometimes that is like an incentive to kind of keep writing to the fun parts.
Very cool. And different writers have different processes too, as far as like for Jeffe, like
We're totally different.
yeah. So she is straight through, and when it's time for that sex scene, she writes it like because it's that momentum. You have the story going, you're into it, you're into these characters, and it's always you always want your sex scenes to relate to the story. You know, just throwing sex scenes in there, but for me, I'm more into the story, and I put in capital letters, insert super hot sex scene here, and then I go back and write it.
And once she turned in a book to her editor, she forgot.
Yes.
And the editor's like, so
where's the I didn't want that part. I was really looking forward to that.
And I'm going to add something because I'm talking nonstop, and we did see that you have a question, but I want to come back to yours because one thing that's really interesting about like things like nodding or like there's a whole subgenre that's monster fucking, right? And that's embracing the other. That's part of the character development and part of the excitement of it. And you were talking before about your book, God's Monsters and the Lucky Peach, how people with like these cybernetic attachments and stuff appear to be monsters to people from thousands of years ago. And so it's like humans have become the other. And I think that's a really important thing that we explore in both fantasy and science fiction is like, who is the other and how do you learn to embrace the other? So, okay, you kind of.
Many apologies if you've already answered this. I'm sorry. But is there a moment that you know that that scene is finished, whether it's a romantic scene and it makes you sigh or makes you go, oh, that's great? Like, how do you know that that romantic or passionate scene has reached the point it needs to be done?
Oh, you know what? That will differ on every single writer as well. I'm thinking about, what were those mystery novels that were set in ancient Rome, where the author, shoot, I'm not gonna be able to remember her name, but they're super famous. They're like maybe 20 books of it. But this author did this really cool technique where she finished the sex scene and then she had the break. And then she went back to the sex scene again. And she went back like maybe 4 or 5 times of these, like, they're done, but they're not out of the bed. And then, the sex scene just kept coming and coming and coming. And it had the effect of multiple orgasms for the reader because you were just able to revisit that wonderful place of satisfaction over and over and over again. But that was just her technique, and I've never seen anybody else do it. How do you do it?
Well, I have to be happy with it. And then I have certain readers that I want to make uncomfortable. I have certain readers that I want to give me a girl. And I have some readers who are going to be like, that was fine, So like I know who's going to respond in certain ways. And as long as that's in line with what I expected, I've done a reasonable job.
What do you think? It's when you have to turn it into your editor.
Yeah. No, I admit I spend a lot of time. Like, I'll write a sex scene, and it's like the cheesiest thing, like a B-rated porn. I don't know. It's just really bad, and I have to go over it and over
And
it
layer
and over
in.
it and layer in the emotion.
Oh,
So I think
wow.
what I do is I get the sex part, but that emotion isn't quite there yet. And so I have to go back in and layer that in and layer that in. And I'll do that for 2 days straight.
Yeah.
Yeah, it takes me a while to get it right. Then like it just has to be right.
In the Sunshine books, I beta read that one for you, and like there was the sex scene in it, and it was like, I don't know, like a page long. And it was the big sex scene too. It was the one we've been waiting for, and I'm like, that's it? That's all? And she's like, what?
Yeah, I had to work on that.
Yeah, it's something you're going to have to learn and work really hard on to figure out and get beta readers to tell you what's up.
Yeah.
There's a writer that I'm vaguely familiar with who's a self-published writer, and nothing against self-published writers, but she's writing explicit sex, but her sex scenes are 1 paragraph long.
Oh,
And that, no,
no.
we
haven't even settled in yet.
like it's explicit. There's
The
thrusting and
amount
stuff,
of
but it,
build-up should be proportional to the length of your
Right.
sex scene.
Yeah, no, but I mean, it is, sex scenes should have a very similar rhythm to sex, you know, so if your sex scenes are brace yourself, Bridget, you know, or if they are, you've never heard that one before? That's Scottish foreplay, brace yourself, Bridget. So I come from a Scottish family, so I don't think I'm allowed anyway, but there you are. You know, and the same with like the aftermath is that, okay, you know, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, you know, okay, thanks, bye. For me, like, it's got to have the emotional arc in there, you know, so it's like, sometimes the characters aren't done talking, sometimes they aren't done being with each other, you know, like sometimes you need that lingering in bed, and there's, you know, so many different ways of having sex, so many different moods, you know, so like maybe there is the ferocious have to have you scene, but then you follow up with the very tender scene that may like unravel your characters even more, because like there's an ability to hide in the really fierce stuff, but when you get to that tenderness, to that openness and vulnerability, that can be very, very different for your characters, right?
Yeah, I think that's the most individual kind of moment for your character sometimes, is that after the release, you know, there's nothing left but you and that other person or people or things. And what does that look like? And that's going to look like very different for each character, whereas some of the sexual moves might be similar or, you know, borrowing other things. But that moment, I feel like, is the most individual one. And that's how I approach those scenes.
Yeah, after they've seen you make weird faces
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
seen parts of you that nobody ever sees.
in Walter John Williams' first Praxis book. So I'm gesturing at his
Because Walter's not here, you can be
because
a
Walter's not here. You're Walter Proxy. Post-coital scene where the two characters have finally had sex, and they're ordering basically, you know, science fiction Uber, and she needs carbs and he needs protein, right? So he's like chowing down on like pickled fucking herring or something, and she's got pastries, so it's just kind of nice. They're both like different but together.
Are there illustrations in these stories?
Pardon?
Are they splendidly illustrated?
No,
No photos?
No photos,
drawings?
no.
no, these are novels and short stories, novellas. You have to read them.
Should read some manga instead.
Well, the trick when you're reading them is you can come up with your own illustration.
That's right, you make the brain pictures.
True. Yeah, and speaking of, one of the things that I kept getting comments on was that my sex scenes were too short. And so then when I wrote the 5th Charlie book, I was like, okay, fine, we'll go there. I wrote like this really long, and it went into there and into there and into there. And he's like all serious, and he's very,
So when you say into there and into there and
oh
into
yeah,
there,
no.
do you, are you orifices or
Like
locations?
bathroom, kitchen, like they're all over there.
No, she's like,
So there's this, and so I got more emails on that book. It's people's favorite book. They love that book because of this one thing. It just goes on and on. And at this one point, he brings out utensils, but I don't say what utensils. She's like, what the hell are you going to do with that? You know, and she's like, no, I give up, I'm done. And he's like, no, wait, I have a plan, you know. And so everybody wants to
they
know
want to know what
the
it is.
utensils are. I'm like, no, I just use them. I have no idea. It's so funny, but people do want more information a lot of times.
But isn't that interesting? You think they responded to it because it's inexplicit, it's not explicit,
Right.
Yes.
right?
Right.
So it fires up the imagination.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, what
You're
did he
not
pull from the
really
drawer?
sure.
Right.
And she's just like feeling, because it's first person. So she's not really watching this. She's just feeling, she's like, oh, okay, you know? And so people are like, wait, what is he doing? What exactly is he doing?
Well, that's actually pretty smart, because if you told them and it was something outlandish, that'd be
Right.
like, don't try this at home.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
You could,
yeah. Yeah.
It's like,
yeah.
I can't believe it was barbecue tongs, but you know.
That actually came from, I was listening to the radio. I lived in Albuquerque, I was on the interstate. And I was listening to the radio, and this woman was talking about, okay, when we come back, we're going to tell you the utensil that will just get your wife hot or whatever. I don't remember what it was, but it was something like that, you know? I'm like, wait, utensil? What? Well, I had to go to class. I didn't get to finish the interview. And I think it came from that. It's
You're like,
because I
what
always wanted to
utensil?
know what utensil. And now my readers want to know. I'm like, yeah, I don't know either. I
So
missed
now
that
you may
one.
all put that in your stories. You may
Yes.
have the utensil.
The utensil. An exercise that you could do, and this is from ages ago, years ago, like 40 years ago. One of the writers in residence at my university said that he got his students to write down objects, just write down an object on like 20 objects on a piece of paper, and then turn the page, and he's like, now write a sex scene using all of those objects.
Yeah, we played that as a drinking game and called it How to Please Your Lover.
Oh my, that's fun.
That's cool.
I was at a drinking school.
A drinking school. But so you can practice with these exercises, writing exercises.
Right.
Practice makes perfect.
Anyone else have a question? Have about 10 minutes left.
How do you guys play within the gender dynamics to make sure that either people have agency or autonomy within these sex scenes, or if they don't, like to purposely, I guess in the case of that, I'm not too sure if you guys specifically have mainly heterosexual relationships, so then how are you expressing, if that is so, the woman autonomy involved within it?
I think you lead off on that one.
Me?
Yeah. Well, you read the most overtly queer, I think.
I've written it all. I think all writers should write what moves them specifically. So I'm not going to make a checkbox for myself of identities to hit, but I'm going to try and write real human characters of all different types and do right by them, I think. Yeah, but I'm not writing specifically romance either, so yeah.
I mean, I think you're talking about consent to a certain extent. And I think that's important. There's certainly fantasy spaces where consent is, you know, not an issue or is something that is actually interrogated and explored a little bit. I think in mainstream things, you want to make sure that the consent is obvious. It doesn't have to be verbal, but there has to be some mechanism of recognition that this is okay for both parties. And that can be highly individual, highly contextual, depending on your story world as well. But I think as long as a reasonable person can look at the scene and decide that this is a consensual kind of act, I think that's part of the battle.
Yeah, I think it's a question that we explore over and over again. And you know, like for me, I always want my female characters to be the ones who carry the story. They're the ones who have to fight the big bad or, you know, fulfill the quest or what have you. And so them having power in intimate scenes is important to me too. And I have this series of books called Bonds of Magic, and the first one's called Dark Wizard. And in this universe, wizards are able to wield magic and familiars generate magic, but they can't wield it. And so the familiars become essentially second-class citizens. And the sort of the trope of the first book is like the princess in the tower, and she is having to marry a wizard because of the social structure and all of this kind of thing. And she literally has no power. You know, she can't wield magic. She can't do much about her circumstance. And she ends up married to this wizard. And, you know, so much of this is about what kind of power can she have in the relationship. And I saw someone write a really interesting review of it, because they said that, like, throughout this whole trilogy, all I did was explore the nature of consent and what consent meant, which was not my plan. I mean, I wasn't trying to explore, but I think that's what comes out, is that, you know, like, we write these longer stories, and it's like, if you are in a love relationship, and, you know, can you choose if you don't have power, and what things can you choose and what can you decide? Because, like, what happens in their relationship is he doesn't believe that she actually loves him, because he realizes that she has no choice. And so we can riff on these themes, but it's going to be different in every book.
And really, especially in that first book, I feel like I felt like she had more power than him, even though he was the wizard.
Right.
In many ways, she had more power. It's very interesting. It's very interesting dynamics in that.
But there's lots of ways to play with it, right? Like Kelly's saying, you know, it depends on the character, and being authentic to that person, rather than saying, I need a person who has XYZ, you know? Because I think that's where we get feeling like there's an agenda, or feeling like it's appropriating to be correct in some way.
Write what interests you.
Yeah. Yeah, especially if you want to be a writer, because it's you know, like, there are much easier careers to have. So if you're not writing what interests you, then, you know, you've already shot yourself in the foot. Were you raising your hand, David, or were you? No.
Sorry, I only ask because it's sometimes, like, I feel like reading sex scenes of specific novels can sometimes not show the consent as much.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And then it gets like convinced that this is romantic, even in I don't know, you know, like the authorial intent as authors, if that was purposeful or not. So I wanted to see what your guys' take is on it, because
Some people aren't as careful.
Some people aren't as careful, and a lot of humans, especially in our culture, have a non-con kink, right? That playing with consent, not consent. Like, it's a kink. It's not
Yeah, I mean, we call it dubcon for a reason. Like, there's a whole
dubious consent.
Yeah, dubious consent.
And maybe we're moving out of the point where that kink is as common as it was. And that would be cool. Because there's a lot of other kinky stuff out there that is far more fun.
Yeah. Well, and it's fascinating to see the way things have changed. I inadvertently bought what I thought was a new Nora Roberts novel the other day, and it turned out to be a 1985 novel. And we often, you're young, so you may not, we talk about the rape-tastic 80s, that in romance novels of that era, and we could delve in, and we don't have time, but there were reasons for that, the whole forced seduction, because women felt like they weren't allowed to take pleasure, so they were like, oh, no, don't.
Please don't do that.
Yeah, yes.
This is awful. Yeah.
But it was so funny to read this book, because I thought it was new, and I was like, what the fuck are you doing, Nora? Because this guy's like sneaking into her bedroom, you know, and she's saying, you know, get out, and he's like holding her down, and it was like, it was so wrong for my sensibilities now. And so, you know, like, our ideas of things change.
Thank God.
Yeah.
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 Absolutely.
Kind of with that, perhaps also coming from the same era. One thing I find frustrating sometimes in some romance adjacent subject is the constant use of sexual assault as character growth. And I know a lot of that does come out of the similar like 80s things. I'm thinking of like, you know, the Mercedes Lackey Valdemar books where every single book, that's a big character I don't know if y'all have any thought of that, about that kind of trope as, because some authors seem that that's the only method they have to demonstrate character growth, right? And I gotta be honest, even the first stuff I used to love, it's hard to keep reading.
There's a lot of trauma out there. I mean, it's not something that's gone away in modern day, unfortunately. So I do feel like some people who are writing from that perspective are maybe exercising some of their personal demons and not one to cast judgment on that. But yes, you're right. It is fatiguing, and we'd all like to think that we're beyond that. Yeah, so it's something I think I struggle with because, again, we were talking earlier about what's realistic, right? And that is part of that spectrum of what's realistic in terms of human interaction. But it's not something to be celebrated. And I feel like we're at a point right now with writing where if you put something in a book, it's automatically like you're endorsing it. And that's not the case. But I feel like because the way books are evaluated now, this becomes like a shorthand. You know, it's an like if you put something in your book, you're automatically endorsing it. And so I think that gets conflated sometimes when people are exploring those themes. And then some people, again, aren't as careful.
And there are serious issues in the world that authors should be able to write about.
Yes.
My first published story drew on the epidemic of murdered and missing Indigenous women in northern Canada. And
Is that 3 reincarnations?
yeah, three resurrections of Jessica Churchill. And I had to write that story because one of my classmates in high school is one of those missing women. And I had to write this story because I've been trying to write this story for 30 years. And I got hell for it. And this is my first published story. And people who don't think that you should put rape in a story, I got excoriated on Twitter, and it sucked. But this story had to be, this was an honest and true story. So
Yeah, I mean, again, we talk about the pendulum swing, and, like as Lauren started it out, we've come to a place where, like you're not supposed to put it in there because it was done so badly for so long, right? Like the whole woman in the refrigerator trope, right? Where the rape or murder of the female character is in there solely to motivate the male protagonist to go and take revenge or do the thing. And she doesn't otherwise exist other than to be a victim. And that's, of course, really problematic. But then people pointing out that was problematic, then they go all the other direction and say, oh, well, you should not write about rape
you
and
should
sexual
never
assault.
write about rape.
But it is a reality of our world that, I don't even know what the statistic is, but that, so many women have experienced that. We're not going to whitewash it and say this is not part of the human experience because it's there and it is something to write about.
Something I think is somewhat adjacent to this that I see come up, someone who's polyamorous, is books that were written in the past as a male protagonist having a harem of women. There's the reverse harem trope, but there's not a lot of representation of what I consider a polyamorous relationship, because polyamorous relationships are a mess. That's why they're called polycules, right? It's not always one man, 20 women, or one woman, 20 men, whatever, but the tropes in the genre tend to lean toward the protagonist having this type of setup,
I think some of that's the fantasy,
Yeah.
But I think we're seeing more and more of representations of different kinds of marriages and different kinds of polyamorous families or extended families.
Yeah, I would just say, hold tight. Those stories are coming.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
those writers are writing them. Yes.
Yeah.
Are you giving a hint?
No, I just know what my colleagues are writing, and I know things are coming down the pipeline.
I mean, I think the first time I ever read about, it wasn't called a polycule back then, but it was a science fiction story where it was casually mentioned that this person had several partners back home. And in Murderbot, since we're celebrating Martha, like Dr. Mensa is part of a 3 or 4 person marriage. And that's just, I I don't want to say incidental to the story, but that's her story, and it's there. It's not the focus, but.
My wife, Am Delamonica, actually writing as Alex Beckett, has 2 doorstop science fiction novels where all of the families in the dark polycules.
All right, our time is unfortunately up. So I want to thank all of you for coming and talking about romantasy and science fiction. Let's give our panelists.
Hey, if you want to buy a book from one of our lovely authors, they're right out there, along with cookies and lemonade.
Cookies, lemonade.
Cookies.
No.
No